85-year-old black matriarch humiliated at family reunion, but when she and her white daughter-in-law joined forces. 85-year-old Beatrice Johnson sat in her favorite armchair, her weathered hands smoothing the wrinkles in her floral print dress. The late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting a warm glow across her living room. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, telling the story of a life well lived. Black and white images of her as a young woman in the 1950s, color snapshots of her wedding day, newer digital prints of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Beatrice's eyes lingered on a particular photo, her son Marcus's wedding day. She remembered how handsome he looked in his tuxedo, how proud she felt as she watched him exchange vows with Sarah, a young white woman from the suburbs. At the time, Beatrice had been filled with hope for their future, even as a small part of her worried about the challenges they might face as an interracial couple. Born in 1939 in rural Georgia, Beatrice had lived through some of the most tumultuous times in American history. She'd seen the rise of the civil rights movement, watched as segregation was dismantled, and rejoiced when Barack Obama was elected president. But she'd also experienced firsthand the sting of racism, the weight of prejudice, that seemed to lessen over the years but never quite disappeared. As a child, Beatrice had to use separate water fountains and attend segregated schools. She remembered the fear that gripped her community during the height of the civil rights struggles and the joy that came with each hard-won victory. Through it all, her parents had instilled in her a sense of dignity and self-worth that no amount of discrimination could shake. Beatrice had met her husband, Robert, at a church picnic in 1960. He was a tall, handsome man with a ready smile and a passion for justice. Together they'd marched for equality, built a home, and raised 3 children. Marcus, the oldest, and twin girls, Lydia and Leah. Robert had passed away 5 years ago, leaving Beatrice to navigate her twilight years alone. She missed him terribly, especially in moments like these when she needed his steady presence and wise counsel. A knock at the door pulled Beatrice from her reverie. "Come in," she called, her voice strong despite her years. Marcus stepped into the room, his face creased with worry. At 55, he was the spitting image of his father. Same height, same broad shoulders, same kind eyes. "Hey, Mama," he said, bending to kiss her cheek. "How are you feeling today?" Beatrice patted his hand. "Oh, I'm just fine, baby. These old bones creep, but I can't complain. How are things with you and Sarah?" A shadow passed over Marcus's face. That's actually why I'm here, Mama. We need to talk about something." Beatrice felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. She'd always prided herself on her close relationship with her son, but lately there had been a tension between them that she couldn't quite put her finger on. "What is it, Marcus? You know you can tell me anything." Marcus sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand over his close-cropped hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "It's about the family reunion next month. Sarah, well, she thinks it might be better if you didn't come." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow. She blinked, certain she must have misheard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "Sarah feels that, given what happened at Christmas, it might be awkward to have you there. She thinks it would be better for everyone if you sat this one out." Memories of the Christmas dinner flooded back. Tense atmosphere, the clipped conversations, and the moment when Sarah had snapped at Beatrice for interfering in the way she was raising her children. Beatrice had only been trying to help, sharing stories about Marcus's childhood and offering advice gleaned from decades of motherhood. She hadn't realized her words were causing such offense. "I see," Beatrice said softly, her heart heavy. "And what do you think about this, Marcus?" Her son shifted uncomfortably. I think maybe Sarah has a point. Things have been strained, and with all the extended family there, it might be easier if you stayed home this year, just to keep the peace." Beatrice felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. She'd faced discrimination and prejudice throughout her life, but never had she imagined she'd be excluded from her own family gathering, and at the request of her daughter-in-law, no less. "Marcus Johnson," she said, her voice low and steady. "I have lived through segregation, the fight for civil rights, through times when people who looked like me weren't even allowed to eat in the same restaurants as white folks. And now you're telling me that I'm not welcome at my own family reunion because your wife feels awkward? Marcus flinched at the steel in his mother's tone. Mama, it's not like that. Sarah just thinks. I don't give a damn what Sarah thinks, Beatrice interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. I am your mother. I am your children's grandmother, and I will not be pushed aside like some inconvenient relic. She stood up, her 5'4" frame seeming to tower over her son. You tell Sarah that I will be at that reunion, and if she has a problem with that, she can come and tell me to my face. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He'd rarely seen his mother this angry, and he didn't know how to respond. Finally, he nodded. I'll talk to her, Mama. We'll figure something out. As he left, Beatrice sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. She looked again at the wedding photo on the mantel, remembering the hope and joy of that day. How had things gone so wrong? Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. Beatrice closed her eyes, feeling every one of her 85 years. She knew that the coming days would be challenging, that she'd need to summon all her strength and dignity to face what lay ahead. But she was Beatrice Johnson, and she had no intention of going quietly into the night. As darkness fell, she began to plan. This was far from over. The day of the family reunion dawned bright and clear, with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Beatrice stood before her mirror, carefully applying a touch of lipstick and adjusting her favorite pearl necklace. She'd chosen an elegant navy blue dress for the occasion, one that Robert had always said brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. As she smoothed her silver hair, Beatrice steeled herself for the day ahead. Despite Marcus's attempts to dissuade her, she was determined to attend the reunion. This was her family, after all, and she wouldn't be pushed aside so easily. The drive to the park where the reunion was being held was tense. Marcus kept glancing at her nervously from the driver's seat, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Beatrice maintained a dignified silence, her chin held high. As they pulled into the parking lot, Beatrice could see the gathering of her extended family. Colorful balloons bobbed in the breeze, and the smell of barbecue wafted through the air. Children's laughter rang out, a sound that usually brought joy to Beatrice's heart. Today, however, it was overshadowed by the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Are you sure about this, Mama? Marcus asked as he helped her out of the car. Beatrice fixed him with a steady gaze. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, son. They made their way towards the pavilion, where most of the family had gathered. Beatrice could see her daughters, Lydia and Leah, setting up food on long tables. Her grandchildren were playing a game of tag nearby, and there, in the center of it all, was Sarah. Sarah Johnson stood out in the crowd, her blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight. 48, she was still strikingly beautiful, with a slim figure that belied the fact she'd given birth to 3 children. As Beatrice approached, she saw Sarah's smile falter, replaced by a look of surprise and then barely concealed annoyance. Beatrice, Sarah said, voice tight. We weren't expecting you. Hello, Sarah, Beatrice replied evenly. I wouldn't miss a family gathering for the world. An awkward silence fell over the group. Beatrice could feel the eyes of her relatives on her, could sense the tension that had suddenly descended on the previously jovial atmosphere. It was Lydia who broke the silence, rushing forward to embrace her mother. Mama, I'm so glad you're here. Come on, let me get you a plate of food. Grateful for her daughter's intervention, Beatrice allowed herself to be led to the buffet table. As she filled her plate, she could hear Sarah's hushed, angry whispers to Marcus. She pretended not to notice, instead focusing on greeting other family members who came to say hello. For a while, it seemed as though the reunion might proceed without incident. Beatrice sat with her great-grandchildren, listening to their stories and dispensing candy from her purse. She chatted with cousins she hadn't seen in years, catching up on family news and sharing memories of reunions past. But as the afternoon wore on, Beatrice could feel Sarah's icy stare boring into her. The younger woman made no attempt to speak to her mother-in-law, instead hovering at the edges of conversations, her disapproval palpable. The breaking point came as Beatrice was talking to her youngest granddaughter, Emily. The 12-year-old was excitedly telling her grandmother about a school project on the civil rights movement. "Grandma," Emily said, her eyes shining, "we're supposed to interview someone who lived through that time. I was hoping maybe you could talk to my class about what it was like." Beatrice felt a surge of pride and affection for her granddaughter. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd be honored to share my experiences with your class." "Absolutely not." Sarah's voice cut through the air like a knife. She strode over, face flushed with anger. "Emily, you are not to bother your grandmother with t." Beatrice looked up, startled. "It's no bother at all, Sarah. I'd be happy to." "I said no," Sarah snapped. "Emily doesn't need to be exposed to all that negativity. We're trying to raise our children to see beyond race, not to dwell on past injustices." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Beatrice felt as though she'd been slapped. Around them, conversations had stopped as people turned to watch the confrontation. "Sarah," Beatrice said, fighting to keep her voice calm, "my experiences are not negativity. They are a part of our history, part of who I am. And they're a part of who your children are too." Sarah's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare tell me how to raise my children. You had your chance with Marcus, and look how that turned out." A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mask of shock and embarrassment. "Sarah, that's enough." Sarah was on a roll now, years of pent-up resentment spilling out. "No, it's not enough. I'm sick of tiptoeing around her feelings, of having to censor myself in my own home. She's always there, judging me, trying to undermine my parenting. Well, I've had it." Beatrice stood slowly, heart pounding. She'd faced down racist bullies and discriminatory laws. Nothing had prepared her for this assault from her own family. "Sarah," she said softly, "I have never judged you. I have only ever tried to love you and support you as a member of this family." "Love?" Sarah scoffed. "Is that what you call it? The snide comments about how things were done in your day? Constant reminders of your struggles, as if the rest of us haven't faced challenges too? You're not a saint, Beatrice. You're just an old woman who can't accept that times have changed." Words cut deep, each one a fresh wound. Beatrice felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I may be old," Beatrice said, her voice strong despite the pain in her heart, "but I have lived through times you can't even imagine. I have fought for the right to be treated as a human being. I have loved and lost and survived, and I will not stand here and be disrespected by someone who has no idea of the battles I've fought." She turned to the stunned faces of her family. "I'm sorry," she said. "I think it's best if I leave now." As she walked away, she could hear the murmur of voices behind her. Marcus called out, "Mama, wait," but she didn't turn back. With as much dignity as she could muster, Beatrice made her way to the parking lot. It wasn't until she was safely in her car, alone, that she allowed the tears to fall. As she wept, she wondered how things had come to this, and what Robert would say if he could see their family now. The reunion continued behind her, but for Beatrice Johnson, the world had shifted on its axis. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the disastrous family reunion passed in a blur for Beatrice. She moved through her daily routines mechanically, the harsh words exchanged at the park echoing in her mind. The phone rang occasionally, but she let it go to voicemail, not ready to face the fallout from the confrontation. It was on the fourth day that a gentle knock on her front door roused her from her melancholy. Beatrice opened it to find her daughters, Lydia and Leah, standing on the porch with concerned expressions. "Mama," Lydia said softly, "we've been worried about you. Can we come in?" Beatrice nodded, stepping aside to let her daughters enter. The twins, now in their early 50s, had always been her rocks, steady presences in times of trouble. As they settled in the living room, Leah took her mother's hand. "We're so sorry about what happened at the reunion, Mama," Leah said. "It was awful, the way Sarah spoke to you." Beatrice sighed deeply. "I just don't understand how things got to this point. I've always tried to be welcoming to Sarah, to accept her as part of our family." Lydia exchanged a glance with her sister. "We know, Mama, but well, there's been tension between you and Sarah for a long time, maybe longer than you realize." "What do you mean?" Beatrice asked, frowning. Leah squeezed her mother's hand. Sarah's always felt like an outsider in the family. She's told us that she sometimes feels judged, like she can never live up to your standards. Beatrice was taken aback. But I've never judged her. I've only ever tried to help, to share my experiences. We know that, Mama, Lydia said gently. But sometimes the way you talk about the past, about your struggles, it can make Sarah feel like you're implying she's had it easy. She doesn't understand real hardship. The realization hit Beatrice like a ton of bricks. Had her attempts to share her life experiences really come across as judgmental? Had she inadvertently made Sarah feel unwelcome all these years? I never meant to make her feel that way, Beatrice said softly. I just wanted to be close to her, to be a part of my son's life and my grandchildren's lives. Leah nodded. We know, Mama, and that's why we're here. We want to help bridge this gap, to find a way for you and Sarah to understand each other better. As they talked, Beatrice began to see the situation from a different perspective. She realized that while she had faced overt racism and discrimination in her life, Sarah, too, struggles of her own. Pressure of being a working mother, the challenges of raising biracial children in a world that still grappled with racial issues, feeling of being an outsider in her husband's close-knit family. These were all real and valid struggles. What can I do? Beatrice asked, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. How can I make this right? Lydia smiled. Well, that's the other reason we're here. Marcus called us this morning. He and Sarah want to come over tomorrow to talk. They want to try to work things out. Beatrice felt a mix of anxiety and relief at the news. You think that's a good idea? After what happened at the reunion? The start, Leah said firmly. And we'll be here with you, Mama. We're not going to let this family fall apart. As her daughters left that evening, Beatrice felt a renewed sense of purpose. She spent the night reflecting on her relationships, on the ways she might have unintentionally contributed to the tension with Sarah. She thought about the world her grandchildren were growing up in, so different from her own childhood, yet still fraught with its own set of challenges. The next morning, Beatrice woke early. She put on a pretty blouse, fixed her hair, and prepared a batch of her famous sweet potato pie, Sarah's favorite, though the younger woman had never admitted it. At precisely 11 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Beatrice took a deep breath, smoothed her skirt, and went to answer it. On her doorstep stood Marcus and Sarah, both looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Come in, Beatrice said, her voice warm despite her nervousness. I've made some pie. As they settled in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. Beatrice looked at her son and daughter-in-law, seeing them perhaps for the first time not as adversaries, but as two people struggling with their own insecurities and fears. I want to apologize, Beatrice began, her voice steady. I realize now that I may have made you feel judged or uncomfortable, Sarah. That was never my intention, but I see now how my words and actions might have come across that way. Sarah looked surprised, then her expression softened slightly. I appreciate that, Beatrice, and I need to apologize too. The things I said at the reunion were cruel and uncalled for. I let my frustrations get the better of me, and I'm truly sorry for them. Marcus reached out, taking his mother's hand in one of his and his wife's in the other. We all need to do better, he said. This family means everything to me, and I can't bear to see it torn apart like. As they talked, years of misunderstandings and unspoken resentments began to surface. Sarah spoke of feeling constantly measured against Beatrice's experiences, struggling to find her place in a family with such a strong matriarch. Beatrice shared her fears of being pushed aside, losing her connection to her son and grandchildren. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, raised voices, and moments when it seemed like the gulf between them was too wide to bridge. But as the hours passed, something began to shift. The walls of defensiveness started to crumble, replaced by a tentative understanding. I never wanted to make you feel like an outsider, Beatrice said to Sarah. You're the mother of my grandchildren, the woman my son loves. You are family, and I'm sorry if I ever made you feel otherwise. Sarah wiped away a tear. And I'm sorry for trying to exclude you, not appreciating the wealth of experience and love you bring to our family. I was wrong to try to keep you away from the reunion, and I was wrong in how I spoke to you there. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows, Beatrice felt a glimmer of hope. They had taken the first steps towards healing, towards building a new understanding. It wouldn't be easy. Years of tension couldn't be erased in a single afternoon, but it was a start. Before they left, Sarah hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced Beatrice. It was a brief hug, still tinged with awkwardness, but it felt like a promise of better days to come. That night, as Beatrice prepared for bed, she found herself smiling for the first time in days. She picked up the photo of Robert from her nightstand, tracing his face with her finger. "Oh, Robert," she said softly. "I wish you were here to see this. Our family is bent, but not broken. Going to be okay." As she drifted off to sleep, Beatrice felt a sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build bridges and heal old wounds. For now, she could rest, knowing that the love that bound her family together was stronger than any conflict. The road ahead would not be easy, but Beatrice Johnson had never shied away from a challenge. With grace, wisdom, and an open heart, she was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the emotional conversation at Beatrice's house were filled with cautious optimism and tentative steps towards healing. Both Beatrice and Sarah were committed to mending their relationship, but years of misunderstandings and hurt feelings couldn't be erased overnight. Their first attempt at reconciliation came in the form of a cooking lesson. Sarah had always admired Beatrice's culinary skills, particularly her ability to create mouth-watering soul food dishes that had been passed down through generations. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah arrived at Beatrice's house, cookbook in hand and determination in her eyes. "I was hoping," Sarah said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "that you might teach me how to make your famous collard greens. The kids love them, and I've never been able to get them quite right." Beatrice felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was a peace offering, she realized, and one she was more than happy to accept. "Of course, dear. Come on into the kitchen." As they worked side by side, washing and chopping the greens, Beatrice began to share stories. Not the heavy-loaded tales of racial struggle that had sometimes made Sarah uncomfortable, but lighter memories of learning to cook at her own grandmother's knee. "You know," Beatrice said as she demonstrated how to properly clean the greens, "my grandma Essie used to say that cooking collards was like raising children. You've got to be patient, give them the right balance of ingredients, know when to let them simmer and when to stir things up." Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that eased some of the tension between them. "I guess I'm still learning how to do both," she admitted. As the kitchen filled with the aromatic blend of simmering greens, smoked turkey, and spices, Beatrice and Sarah found themselves opening up to each other in ways they never had before. Sarah spoke about her insecurities as a mother, her fears of not being able to adequately prepare her biracial children for the challenges they might face. "I worry sometimes," Sarah confessed, her eyes fixed on the pot of greens, "that I can't give them what they need, that because I'm white, I can't fully understand or prepare them for the world they'll face." Beatrice laid a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "Oh, honey, being a mother is always a journey of learning. You love those children fiercely, and that's the most important thing. As for the rest, well, that's why they have a whole family around them. We all bring something different to the table." The afternoon stretched into evening, and by the time Marcus arrived to pick up Sarah, the two women had made significant progress. It wasn't just about the perfectly cooked collard greens, though those were a triumph in themselves. It was about the bridges they had begun to build, the understanding they had started to foster. Encouraged by the success of the cooking lesson, Beatrice and Sarah began to make more efforts to spend time together. They started a bi-weekly lunch date, sometimes at Beatrice's house, sometimes at a local cafe. During these meetings, they slowly began to peel back the layers of their relationship, addressing old hurts and misunderstanding. One particularly memorable lunch found them discussing the incident at the family reunion. Sarah, her voice thick with emotion, tried to explain her outburst. "I felt so defensive that day," she admitted, "like I was being judged for not understanding the struggles you've been through. And instead of trying to understand, I lashed out. I'm so ashamed of how I behaved." Beatrice reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand in hers. "We both made mistakes, dear. I realize now that I sometimes talked about my experiences in a way that made you feel inadequate or excluded. That was never my intention, but impact matters more than intent." As they talked, they began to see each other more clearly. Beatrice saw not just her son's wife, but a woman struggling to navigate a complex world and raise her children with love and understanding. Sarah began to see Beatrice not as an intimidating figure from a different era, but as a strong, loving woman with a wealth of experience to share. Their growing understanding had a ripple effect on the entire family. Marcus, who had often felt caught in the middle, noticed the change with relief and joy. The children, picking up on the shift in dynamics, began to spend more time with their grandmother, eager to hear her stories and learn from her experiences. One day, about 2 months after their first cooking lesson, Sarah approached Beatrice with an idea. "I've been thinking," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "Remember how Emily wanted you to speak to her class about your experiences during the civil rights movement?" Beatrice nodded, a twinge of pain at the memory of how that conversation had ended at the reunion. "Well," Sarah continued, "I spoke with Emily's teacher. They're still looking for speakers for their unit on civil rights. I thought maybe we could do it together. You could share your first-hand experiences, and I could talk about how we're working to continue the fight for equality today." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. This offer represented more than just a speaking engagement. It was Sarah acknowledging the value of Beatrice's experiences and a desire to join forces in educating the next generation. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Beatrice said, voice thick with emotion. The day of the presentation arrived, and Beatrice found herself standing before a classroom of wide-eyed 12-year-olds, with Sarah by her side, as she shared her stories of segregated schools and lunch counters, of marches and protests, of fear and hope and eventual triumph. She saw the children hanging on her every word. And beside her, Sarah listened too, with new understanding and respect. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she talked about modern-day challenges and the ongoing work towards true equality. She spoke of raising biracial children in a world that still grappled with racial issues, and of the importance of understanding history to build a better future. As they finished their presentation, Beatrice felt a sense of pride, not just in the impact they had made on the students, but in how far she and Sarah had come. They had taken their pain and misunderstanding and transformed it into something positive, something that could educate and inspire. That evening, as they sat on Beatrice's porch sipping iced tea, Sarah turned to her mother-in-law with a smile. "Thank you," she said simply, "for today, for everything. I'm starting to understand so much more." Beatrice patted Sarah's hand. "Thank you, dear. We're both learning, aren't we? And that's a beautiful thing." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Beatrice felt a profound sense of peace. They still had a long way to go, many more conversations to have and understandings to reach, but they had made a start, a real and meaningful start. The path to true reconciliation was not always smooth, but with every step, every shared meal, every honest conversation, they were moving forward. And in that movement, Beatrice found hope. For herself, for her family, and for the generations to come. As the months passed, the tentative peace between Beatrice and Sarah blossomed into a genuine friendship. Their bi-weekly lunches became a cherished tradition, often stretching into long afternoons filled with laughter, shared confidences, and the occasional tear. The rest of the family watched in amazement as the two women, once so at odds, grew closer with each passing day. It was during one of these lunches, nearly a year after the disastrous family reunion, that Sarah broached a subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Beatrice," she said, setting down her fork and meeting her mother-in-law's eyes, "I've been thinking about last year's reunion, about how I tried to exclude you, and then how horribly I behaved when you came anyway." Beatrice reached out, patting Sarah's hand. "Oh, honey, we've moved past that, haven't we?" Sarah nodded, pressed on. "We have, and I'm so grateful for that. But I can't help feeling that we need to do something more. Something to show the whole family how far we've come." A slow smile spread across Beatrice's face as she realized what Sarah was suggesting. You want to host another reunion? Yes, Sarah said, her eyes shining with determination. But this time, I want us to plan it together, to show everyone that we're not just tolerating each other, but that we've truly become family. And so, over the next few months, Beatrice and Sarah threw themselves into planning the perfect family gathering. They pored over recipe books, blending traditional soul food dishes with some of Sarah's family favorites. They created playlists that spanned generations, from jazz and blues to modern hip-hop. They even worked together on a family history project, combining Beatrice's wealth of stories with Sarah's scrapbooking skills, create a beautiful timeline of their shared family legacy. As the day of the reunion approached, word spread through the family about the unlikely partnership behind the event. Curiosity and excitement built, with relatives near and far eager to see the results of this collaboration. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, much like the ill-fated gathering of the previous year. At this time, as Beatrice arrived at the park, she felt only joy and anticipation. Sarah was there to greet her, enveloping her in a warm hug. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. Beatrice squeezed her hand. "More than ready, dear? Let's show them what family really means." As guests began to arrive, they were met with a scene that beautifully blended the old and the new. Under a banner that read, "Johnson Family, honoring our past, embracing our future," tables groaned under the weight of both soul food classics and modern cuisine. The air was filled with a mix of music that got toes tapping across generations. And at the center of it all were Beatrice and Sarah, moving in tandem to greet guests, direct activities, and ensure everyone felt welcome. The highlight of the day came after lunch, when Beatrice and Sarah stood together to address the gathered family. Sarah spoke first, her voice clear and strong. "Last year I made a terrible mistake," she began. "I tried to exclude the heart of this family, to push aside the wisdom and love that Beatrice brings to all our lives. I was wrong, and I'm so grateful that I've been given the chance to make amends." She turned to Beatrice, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've taught me so much about strength, about resilience, and about what it truly means to be family. Thank you for not giving up on me, for showing me that love can bridge any gap." Beatrice stepped forward then, taking Sarah's hand in hers. "And thank you, Sarah, for opening your heart to me, for being willing to listen and learn, just as I have listened and learned from you. Our family is richer for having you in it." Turning back to the gathered relatives, Beatrice continued, "Family isn't just about blood. It's about love, understanding, and the willingness to grow together. Sarah and I stand before you today as proof that it's never too late to heal old wounds, build new bridges." As they finished speaking, a hush fell over the gathering. Then, slowly, it was broken by the sound of applause. Family members rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes, to celebrate the remarkable transformation they had witnessed. The rest of the reunion was a joyous affair. Beatrice found herself surrounded by great-grandchildren, eager to hear her stories, while Sarah moved easily among Beatrice's older relative, no longer feeling like an outsider. Marcus watched his mother and wife with pride, marveling at the change in their relationship. As the sun began to set and the reunion wound down, Beatrice found a quiet moment to herself. She sat on a park bench, watching her family laughing and talking, cleaning up the remnants of the day's festivities. Sarah caught her eye from across the park and smiled warmly, raising her hand in a small wave. Beatrice felt a presence beside her and turned to see Lydia settling onto the bench. "You did it, Mama," her daughter said softly. "You and Sarah both. You've healed this family." Beatrice nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over her. "We all did it, honey. It took all of us. Willing to listen, forgive, try again." As she sat there, surrounded by the love of her family, Beatrice reflected on the journey of the past year. From the pain and humiliation of the previous reunion to this moment of joy and unity, it had been a path filled with challenges. But it had also been a journey of growth, rediscovering the strength of family bonds, and of finding new depths of love and understanding. She thought of Robert, wishing he could have been there to see this day. But in her heart, he knew he would have been proud. Proud of her for not giving up, proud of Sarah for opening her heart, proud of their entire family for coming together in love and acceptance. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Beatrice Johnson, 86 years old, and filled with a lifetime of experiences, looked out at her family with joy and hope. They had faced their challenges head-on, had done the hard work of reconciliation, and had come out stronger for it. Whatever the future might hold, Beatrice knew that this family, her family, would face it together, united by love, strengthened by understanding, and enriched by the beautiful tapestry of experiences and cultures they all brought to the table. As Marcus approached to take her home, Beatrice stood, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Ready to go, Mama?" he asked, offering his arm. Beatrice took one last look at the park, at the family still lingering, at Sarah, who was now walking towards them with a warm smile. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with contentment. "I'm ready. Let's go home." And as they left the park, Beatrice knew that home now meant something richer, something fuller than it ever had before. It meant a family healed, a future bright with promise, and a love that could overcome any obstacle.